All right. Well, welcome everybody to another episode of the Warrior Within podcast for the Fifth Direction community and beyond. I'm really delighted today to be joined by Carly Mountain. I'll tell you a little bit about what I know of Carly Mountain and what she does in the world, but I'll also leave it to her words. Um, so, I guess just by getting some context here, I first came across Carly's work through your book, Carly. As you know, we talked about the beautiful myth of Inanna and everything that you've all the amazing kind of work that you've weaved your way around using that myth as kind of a foundation, this idea of conscious descent for women. And then more recently, you were, I know you've just submitted the draft, a new book, another book, and you put out a little call to men, kind of asking them some questions which we can get into. And I really found myself drawn to the theme which you were exploring there, and kind of quickly put my hand up, and you and I were able to have a conversation around that. So I thank you for the opportunity there.
Yeah, it was a great pleasure to speak to you.
Oh, thanks, Carly. Thanks. Yeah. So I guess by saying all of that, welcome.
Thank you.
Mm. What I like to do, Carly, is kind of start by asking you just to kind of orient ourselves and for our listeners where you are in the world, kind of
Mm,
geographically, and maybe who's in the house with you, and kind of how you're set up that way right now. And the second question is kind of where are you? What's alive for you, and what's actually happening in your kind of creative expression in the world, I guess. So those are my two opening questions.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm in Sheffield in the UK, so middle north of the UK. And I live with my husband of 20 years and my two daughters who are teenagers now and rapidly, yeah, young women. They're a delight. I love them very much. And a crazy dog and a cat that don't get on. So that's always interesting. And what's going on for me creatively at the moment? I have so much creative work flowing through me at the moment, almost too much to keep a track of myself. I'm just kind of, I feel like I'm kind of, it's taking me and I'm trying to keep up with it, which is both delightful and at times I have to kind of, yeah, put the brakes on a little bit and have a bit of a rest. So, as you said, I've just submitted my second book to my publisher, which I'm really excited about, but that won't be out for a year. So, I'm working on a women's sensual yoga course that's going to be an on-demand course that's coming up. And I have a new online container starting soon called the Sex Salon, which I've got a group of 24 women traveling with me, which will also form the research for one of my next books. So that's a couple of things, and there's quite a lot more besides. Yeah, but I'll keep it to that for now.
Oh, thanks, Carly. Look, there's a couple of things there I'd love to dig into in a second because it all sounds really fascinating. I mean, just I really don't like the idea of kind of, pinning people to a wall like a butterfly in terms of like, what do you do, and how do we kind of put a label on it? But, if I look at some words that have been wrapped around you by way of a bio, it says things like psychotherapist, psychosexual, somatic therapist, breath worker, writer,
Mm.
women's guide, women's initiatory guide.
Yeah.
Does that kind of sum it up, or is there something else there that maybe you'd like to kind of talk about?
Yeah, that sums it up, I think. And I do also work with men, but my the majority of my work has been with women to date, but it's felt really important, as you named, for this latest book. Whilst the first book focused on women's stories, this book has focused on male voices and male stories as well as women's stories.
Mm,
And I think that's part of where my work is evolving because I really feel at the moment an increasing split between males and females and this polarity that seems to be growing. And it feels really important to me that we somehow, as human beings, remember that we are all human beings and that actually we need to understand each other and dig beneath those polarizing aspects and find out actually who we're speaking to and what we're actually about, which I think there's a lot more that connects us than divides us, actually. So it's really curious the way that there's this polarity going on very strongly at the moment, and I feel like I want to facilitate a different conversation.
Look, I think that's a beautiful thing. And as a man who over the last, 15, 17 years has been mostly involved in men's work,
Yeah.
I can feel the same thing. I can feel
Yeah.
exactly the same thing. And for me, it's really about, celebrating those differences, but also noticing just yeah, how much there is the same, just exactly the way in which you said it. I think it's absolutely beautiful. And a lot of the workshops that we're running now at the Fifth Direction kind of speak to that as well. So all the more reason for me to get excited for you to come in and join us at some point, because that's exactly what we need to hear and it's exactly what we need to be talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah, it's really important, isn't it? And also to see how we complement each other, because it's not even that the differences are a bad thing. Like we're not meant to be the same, men and
mm,
women, I don't think.
mm,
But it's curious, isn't it? There's a lot
mm.
to dig into there.
Well, I
Yeah.
think life is, you know, life springs from that dance, that kind of tension of opposites, and our ability to kind of hold and celebrate the tension rather than being sort of drawn one way or another. I go back to Rilke, the poet, a lot, who talks about, the archer with the bow, and it's kind of like, the accuracy of the arrow is by how well you can kind of hold the tension of the string by pulling it back, and it's interesting, the further you pull it back, the closer the two ends they start to come towards each other, right? So when you
Yeah.
really are able to hold that tension, you actually bring the polarities closer together. It's a beautiful metaphor. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
really beautiful metaphor. Yeah.
yeah. So I think that's the dance, if you ask me, anyway.
Yeah.
The
Yeah, I
dance that we're
agree.
in.
And I think Rilke is one of the greats at expressing those things. He's a big guide for me as well. I absolutely love his work.
Yeah, yeah, and of course he's not the only one to talk about that sort of tension of opposites too. I think we can go all the way back to Heraclitus, and the harp string, and it's just it all makes sense. How do you get the most beautiful note? It's that way. Mm,
Mm.
mm.
Mhm.
I want to ask you, Carly, around also because obviously when I read your book, and I already was completely um, um, I guess in love with the inanimate as a guide for myself anyway. But to hear your words around it, it actually took me. It really expanded my thinking on the myth. So firstly, I want to say thank you for that. But as a man, I really took a lot out of that book. I really did. And you introduced some areas of the myth for me where I'd kind of felt like maybe I'd glossed over,
Right.
and I was able to kind of retrace my steps and stop in places where I hadn't previously stopped. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, I just love that book's out in the world, and I recommend it to people all the time, men and women, in fact. Mm.
Mhm. I'm so curious if you can remember which were the places where you stopped and which were the bits you'd glossed over. I'm so curious.
Well, a big one for me was probably Inanna.
Right.
I feel like when I have heard the story in the past that sometimes she didn't appear at all in versions that I've heard, you know.
Mm.
And when I found her introduced to the story, I thought um, it it sort of softened the blow for me at the end of the story there.
Uh-huh.
I felt a little more, I don't know. I want to use the word seen, but maybe that's not quite the right word. There was just something in me which I was able to let my shoulders go a bit.
Yeah, I
Does that make
actually feel
sense?
it makes sense. And I love the fact that you use the word seen, because I feel like one of the medicines of this myth is the constant presence of the witness. And for those of you who don't know the Inanna myth and haven't read my book, the thing that Geshtanamna represents is compassion. And I think that when we receive compassion, we do drop our shoulders. Like it allows us to be human. And there's something about the fact, so Geshtanana obviously arrives at the very end of that cycle of descent and rising. But she is a witnessing presence. She's a witnessing presence, interestingly, to keep pulling on this thread that seems to be part of our conversation already, a witnessing presence that allows the masculine and feminine to come into a deeper, intimate relationship. And for me, the word intimate, I absolutely love it. And I speak about it in my new book a lot. that it requires a going into the unknown. And at the end of the myth, obviously the masculine, the heady, elevated masculine has just been sent to the underworld. Like he has been, he is going to be initiated, and that's painful. So I think there could be a very harsh edge to an ending of that without the presence of Geshtinana that basically bridges the gap between the pain of our descents, but also the part of us that grows to witness ourselves with more compassion, with more love. And I love that compassion literally means to suffer with. You know, she brings in the part of both us and others that can suffer with, that can be with, that we don't have to be alone in this, that there's parts of ourselves that can witness us and parts of others. And I feel like it's such medicine. So I really love that you bring her. It's interesting because she comes at the end of the book. I don't feel like she quite got as much space as perhaps she deserves. And yeah, I think it is possibly that maybe that's why she gets missed. Like, what do we miss in our endings that are so important? And I feel like compassionate ending is something that I find when I'm working one to one with my clients is something that many people never ever experience. And it's really funny because I don't stipulate how long I end with my one to one psychotherapy clients. I don't say how we end or how long the ending will be. And each person, it's slightly different. But what I do always say to them is, please leave time for the ending. What is it in this ending that you need that you haven't received in other endings? What would a compassionate ending be like? What would it be like to be held in ending? And I think there's something so valuable in that that allows parts of us that have never been witnessed and never had the opportunity to come up to suddenly appear.
Mm.
So, yeah, thank you for bringing that because also it's something that not that many people seem to speak to me about because they think that Geshtinana, again, she is at the end. She's not in the meat of it, but she is absolutely a vital part of the myth and a vital part of what we experience in our actual embodied live descents. So,
No, I
really,
can really feel all that. Thank you for those words. Maybe she belongs at the end, though. I think maybe something changes if she's there earlier than the end. I'm not sure. Probably have to think about that a little longer. But it's a similar pattern in a lot of the old myths. I'm thinking about um, you know, oftentimes it's the woman coming along and kind of like scrubbing off the hard edges of the male and I guess de-armoring him in a way. But
mhm.
then something has to happen to show that compassion as well. You can't just come along and scrub him clean and then just kind of leave him the look of grief on his face. And you see in a lot of the myths that she might I don't know, bathe him in milk or something like that. Like there's just this you've done all the hard work, then there's just this this act of compassion that comes in. And I think
Yeah,
when we think about men's work particularly, that step is often missed. It's like,
sure.
go and do the inner work, do the hard stuff, and then, get on with it. And the bath of milk is often, the Geshtanana is often overlooked. Yeah.
I
Does that make sense?
really love, yeah, I really love this idea of the bath of milk because
Mm.
obviously milk is our first literal life source, isn't it? And
Mm.
I think represents something about the source of the feminine and how what I see Geshtanana also being a part of because she's Dumuzi who gets sacrificed, she's his sister.
Mm.
How we must recognize, and particularly for men, I think for men's initiation, recognizing the feminine as an internal source inside of you. But sometimes we cannot do that unless we've been bathed in milk from the outside and reminded of that. And yeah, I really see in the world that there is a lot of kind of peak experiences that are offered. And then, like you say, you're shoved back out into the world. And how do you integrate that?
Mm.
And very like the course that I've just run a course called Naked Power with a wonderful woman called Jacqueline Nguyen. And we held it with calls before online. Then we had the retreat container in person, and they were photographed as part of this shamanic ritual that we did. She's a ceremonial photographer. And then we had two integration calls after the retreat. And the reason for that was Inanna.
Mm.
It's like if we aren't held through our initiations, I think we can, as you use the word de-armoring, I think the reason we armor up in the first place is because we're not adequately held. And if we get chucked back out into the world again, completely naked and exposed, what are we going to do? We're going to armor up again because it's the only thing that we've known. So, yeah, to be able to integrate requires compassion. And I think compassion requires often a community holding and a witnessing that hasn't been had before, so that our nervous systems can literally soften and integrate in a way that hasn't been possible in the past.
Mm.
So rewriting an ending, if you like, as you continue living. So I'm really moved by your recognition that males need that in men's circles as well, because there's so much of this narrative, isn't there, of that it's a good thing for men to armor up, that that's what you're meant to do. That's your role. Like, get your armor on and go out into the world. It's like, wow,
Mm.
what if we bathe you in milk
Mm.
and take the armor off? It feels really profound to me.
Yeah, to me too. Not just for a man to do the inner work and then just get on with it. There's a step. There's the Inanna step. It's like you could even look at the wound itself as being a metaphor. It's like if you don't tend to that wound and you just go back out, then it's going to scab up again, and
Exactly.
that's the armor. It's just the body doing what it does without the necessary tending that needs to happen.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm. Now this is beautiful. Um, and I'm hearing you mention these retreats that you're currently very invested in. I really want to get there so that we can talk about these things. But I have a question that I do want to ask you about Inanna, and
Sure.
it's a very foundational one, and it's simply how did Inanna arrive in your life? Jung always talks about find the myth you're living. Enter the
Mm.
story, and is that kind of how it was for you? Is Inanna kind of the central myth for you in terms of your life?
She
And
is
how
this,
did she become that?
yeah, by accident, as often is the case with these things. Exactly what you've just said. I was living it, and I went to do a La Loba weekend with a woman called Linda Hartley. And actually, the way she speaks about Inanna is absolutely beautiful. She was a big teacher for me about the Inanna myth in general, but also Inanna. She really hones in on that in her work as well. And I bought her book at this retreat and took it home. And inside of the book, she looks at lots of different mythologies. It's called Servants of the Sacred Dream, this book. If anyone's interested, it's a really excellent book. And one of the myths that she covers in that book is the Inanna myth. And as I was reading it, I literally felt like somebody was just giving me a story that was my life. And I couldn't believe my eyes. It's like when I've had a similar feeling when people speak a poem that really speaks to me in the depths of what I'm in, and it just articulates something that's almost ineffable. It's that feeling. And I was just like, how is this possible? That this ancient myth is speaking to exactly the process that I'm in. And I think when you are in the descent, what I found was I was so hungry there. I mean, ravenous. All the parts of me that hadn't been fed and nourished were kind of grasping for some kind of outer nourishment to kind of validate where I was at. Consecrate, that's the better word. It wasn't validation, it was deeper than that. It was consecration. I was looking for consecration. Where can I anchor myself here?
Mm.
And the myth did that for me. And then I just obviously couldn't get enough of it. I couldn't get to know it enough. So I read different versions and worked with it myself. I started to work with it in circles. And it just grew from there, really. And I'm still working with it to this day because I think it will be, as you say, I think it's the myth of my life. I think it's the myth that will keep giving me medicine, and I could work with it forever and probably still never get everything that there is to get out of it. It's so rich and deep.
Mm. There's so much to say there. For me, deeply invested in the idea of myth as medicine, and I think when we find a myth or a story that speaks to us that deeply, it is something that stays with us. You're in it for the entirety of your life. And, through the ups and downs and the ins and outs of your life, you can always find your place within the story, and from the story, then derive whatever it is that you need to take the next step, or simply just to be with where you are.
Mm. I'm so curious.
Go on.
Sorry, I
No, please go
crushed
on.
you. I wonder how Inanna came into your life. When did you come across the myth?
Yeah, look, it was similar in the sense of hearing it within a retreat,
Uh,
and it just it sat me on my bum basically.
yeah.
I remember going back to my room that night and having a cry, and wondering how this ancient story was affecting me so deeply. I didn't understand why,
Mm,
and so I kind of started to do a lot of homework around its history, where the story came from, and then of course, started to find myself investing in other its siblings,
mm,
like Gilgamesh and stories
yes.
like that around, and I could sort of begin to see how all of this kind of started to fit together as just such a deep body of work, as like a rustic compass for the arc of a human life,
How
Um,
beautiful.
yeah, and so for me, there are others as well, and I wouldn't say that Inanna is my myth in the way that it is for you. There's another, but just the same, it's just been an incredible friend. Let's put it that way.
Mm, mhm.
Particularly in dark places, I've found, it's when you're really in that sort of that descent period, it just pops up and says, "Remember, I'm here."
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and also, I guess for me, and I know that you would have felt the same thing, um, just witnessing the guide and the ally it's been for other people.
Sure.
I find that just it's extraordinary. Mm.
Yeah. I mean, it's been so heartening the number of people who have reached out to me and continue to reach out to me going, oh, this book, this myth has really completely changed the way I'm looking at what I'm going through. It's completely reframed it for me. Oh, it's given me a map to really help guide me through these difficult things. I just have so much of that coming my way. And that was my prayer with the book. I was like, this has helped me so much. It cannot not help other people. Why
Mm.
don't more people know about this? And I kind of wanted to write, my intention was to write a book that was a ninshaba. So ninshaba, for those of you that don't know, is Inanna's handmaiden, and she calls her in as her witness and asks her to bang the drum for her if she doesn't come back from the underworld. And I wanted the book to bang the drum for people. That was my hope. I thought, because books can be witnesses, and if people can't find a circle or can't afford a therapist, or the stigma with going to a therapist, then you can buy a book, right?
Mm.
So I really hoped that could be a book form of that witnessing in some level. And I've been told by many people now that that's what it's done, which,
Mm.
yeah,
Mm.
I'm so touched by that repeatedly.
I'm just, I'm called to say, may we all be blessed to have someone who will beat the drum for us if we don't come back from the dark, from the underworld. May we all know who that person is. Maybe all have that person. It's our heartbeat in a way. Mm. Who
Oh, I
knows?
got goosebumps as you
Yeah,
said that.
yeah. Who knows what our heartbeat sounds like because they've had their head on our chest. That person. You know. I was like, I know mine. I know mine. I hope you, and I'm sure you have yours, Carly.
I really do. I really do. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. And when you came across had you already kind of understood the power of storytelling and the power of story, and or was this kind of was the whole kind of, you know, I hate to use the word genre, but the whole idea of myth as medicine something for you, or did this story just come out of the blue?
So I had spent, it took me 18 months to read Clarissa Pinkola Estes' Woman Who Won with the Wolves. It took a long time for me to get through that book because it was doing something to me as I was reading it. And that's what took me to the Laloba weekend, and that's what took me to Inanna. But before that, I would say, so at that time I was in my early 30s. And before that, no, I don't think I did recognize myth as medicine consciously.
Mm.
But I have to say, I always, from being a very, very little kid, loved story, would write stories, would eat books for breakfast. I mean, I just read and read and read and read. And my matrilineal lineage is also Irish. So my grandma would sing lots of the Irish songs that have a story in them. And she would sing to me at bedtime Irish songs and would read to me. And I feel like somewhere in my bones of my ancestry is this. And I didn't really know that consciously, but I feel like it was there to be discovered, if you like. And I
Mm.
think that's actually the case for all of us, because I think storytelling is such an ancient, I mean, it's probably as old as humans, right? Like it is, there's something that is just goes right down to our bones inside of it. So
Mm.
I think it's there to be discovered for everyone, I hope, and something that we've lost. But actually, when you think about the amount of money people pay for good stories now, with books and film is story, it's something we are still really, that's something we do still really love in mainstream society, I think.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, well, it sounds to you like it was. It sounds to me like it was always there for you. And I agree with you. I believe it was the soul's. It is the soul's first language. I really believe that, and I actually think that it's older than humans.
Mm.
You know, I think it's in the earth. I think it exists in the soil. Stories exist like the song lines that we have in Australia. Um, yeah, it's been said that these stories are the earth singing itself back to us.
Well, that makes a lot of sense to me because I really feel that the Inanna myth is also an earth myth. It really,
Mm.
it
Oh,
does feel
for
like that.
sure.
You know, it's something that brings us, but it's like the earth's call back down to
Mm.
earth, into roots, into soil, into mud, nourishment, dark. Yeah, so I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah,
Yeah. It's well, it was literally unearthed in fragments.
yes,
So,
yes,
it quite literally came from under the earth. So,
yeah.
that's a beautiful thing. Yeah. Oh, I'm glad we've had an opportunity to dive into Inanna like that. And again, just, thank you for bringing that book into the world. Um,
Mm.
you know,
I just want to say one more thing, actually,
please.
that's really here for me as you say that, because one of the women I spoke to, because obviously, so this myth, as you will know, but for anyone who doesn't, comes from ancient Sumeria, which is now modern day Iraq, and what is often referred to as the cradle of humanity. And it really, I spoke to a woman called Tamara Albana, who I was so grateful to speak to because I really wanted to speak to someone who was born of the particular soil that this myth emerged from. And I was really struggling to find that person. She was actually the last person I spoke to before I finished the book. And it felt like that was the completing story, if you like. And she was incredibly generous with her time, and the story that she told me about having to flee Iraq because of the conflict there and that it wasn't safe, and how she hasn't been back for many, many, many years, and her mother's never been back, and the heartbreak of that. And there's something to me that is so poignant about what's happening in the Middle of East right now. And actually, our need to collectively descend from this horrendous sky god mentality that we have in order that we can really find our compassion for the people who are being genocidally wiped out in Gaza. And it's horrific. And this myth is the myth of our time in a way, in that sense that where has our humanity gone? That this is where we are, and so that story emerged from that part of the world, and that the conflicts that have been going on in that part of the world for a long time now.
Mm.
For me, there's something to pay attention to there.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for naming that. Thank you for naming it. Yeah, it's yeah, we should all pay more attention to the descent of Inanna, I think, because the medicine's in there for both on an individual and obviously on a collective level as well, you know. Um, and again, we talk about this mythic way of thinking as being part of the solution, because at the moment it's just, again, here we come back to this polarity again. We're searching for answers on the left or the right or the black and the white and at these polarities. But the answer clearly is the third way, the mythic way, and we're taking the word myth back to its etymology, which means, emerging truth. And we just need to listen to the stories, don't we?
We really do. And
Mm,
I was so moved. I don't know if you've heard of the organization. I think it's called New Roots, but it was born of an Israeli rabbi and a Palestinian guy. I can't remember. I think he's a teacher,
mm,
and they came together and they were both, very angry and rageful. They both had families killed in the conflicts. They were blaming each other for that, and they came together and somehow ended up telling each other their story, their life story, and they both ended up crying together and recognizing in each other's pain, but also the mirror of each other. And now they've set up this organization. I really wish I could find the name of it and pull the name of it, but I think it's New Roots. They have now made an organization to bring Palestinians and Israelis together to tell their stories and try to bridge the gap between them so that they can find between them. And I don't know if the work's continuing with the current situation, but I was so moved the way that the compassion of the stories had brought these men together, and then what they tried to grow from that in order to change at a grassroots level the
mm,
relationship between two groups of humanity that are essentially hating each other and blaming each other
mm,
for lots of the pains that have been going on and the murders that have been
mm.
going on. So
Again, that's the beauty of stories, and then then the tears come, and then they can
yes,
they can swim together in the river of their collective grief, if you will. You know,
yeah,
um, that's the beauty of it. Yeah, stories.
they
Mm.
are. It's
I'll see if I
medicine.
yeah, I'll see if I can find the organizer. We'll figure it out, and I'll pop it in the
I'll
I'll pop
send
it
you the
yeah
link. I
I'll
follow them
pop it
on
in the notes here.
Instagram, so
Yeah,
that would be
yeah,
great. Yeah,
yeah.
let's find that.
Um, and so it's a difficult one to kind of segue across to, but clearly there's a bridge there um, between all of that and what you're doing in the world in terms of your the psychosexual work you're doing with women and their kind of the liberation of their sexuality, I guess. I don't know, perhaps you can describe it with better words, but I'd love to hear a little bit about how that came about for you and um, what it is you're actually doing there, and kind of a kind of call or a message to the women listening as to how they can potentially get in touch with you and what happens when they do.
Mm, mm. Yeah, and I'm just curious about the segue. And I think the segue is something to do with how, as adults, sexuality is one of our most primal ways of communicating. And the place where, excuse me, our primal energies come up to the surface, and our original woundings come to the surface too. It's like through the pleasure we also contact our vulnerability and our pain, and so for me, working with sexuality is a place where a tremendous amount of healing and new awareness can spring from. And again, bridging, Inanna was a goddess of sexuality. That's one of her triple, she's a triple goddess. That's one of her medicines. And I feel like if you dig in with someone about the way that they make love and the way they relate to themselves as a sexual being, you really learn so much about their soul and what they've experienced and where they need to have compassionate holding, you know. So, obviously, in the world as we have known it, in terms of dominator sort of patriarchy as we've known it, female sexuality has been so repressed and vilified and both exploited and abused, but also repressed. And so there's so much work to do there. And I find that even when people come to me in one-to-one therapy, knowing that I'm a sex therapist and that's one of the things I offer, often people have to be invited to speak about their sexuality. There's still so much freeze around the taboo topic of sex. And yet it is the thing that created all of us. It is the thing that we wouldn't be here without. And yet there's this culture of silence and oppression around it. So, and you cannot be in your body unless you are. Is that true? Yeah, I think it's true. Unless you are in contact with your erotic energy. You know, you can be sensual, you don't have to be sexual with that. But if you are estranged from or keeping at bay your sexual energy, you are going to be split off from some part of your embodiment. So I'm not saying that I know people take vows of celibacy and choose conscious celibacy and those kinds of things, which is absolutely fine. But I would be really curious about how you're relating to your sexual energy. So I'm not saying you have to be in sexual relationship with another, but how are you relating to your sexuality is definitely a part of our human embodiment. And I'm curious to go there with people and see what's there to be found.
I mean, it's extraordinary hearing those words from you, Carly, because I came to that understanding much later in life through
Mm.
various, well, actually things that we've spoken about already on our
Sure.
previous conversation for the book. But I would have probably had something to say about what you just said. But
Uh-huh.
but now, I totally agree.
Mm.
Now, I totally agree. And there is, and I noticed you hesitated before you said it, but to me at least, it feels true that, how do you be in your body? How do you have, an intimate understanding of what your body is telling you? And if there's no kind of erotic connection, if there's no erotic charge there, it's kind of feels to me like it's the current, isn't it?
It's
And
current.
yeah, and without that, the lights aren't working, for want of a better metaphor.
Yeah, and in its earliest, because Eros obviously has been part of mythology as well,
Mm,
and as you probably know, but for anyone who doesn't, the original form of Eros in the earliest known mythology about Eros, Eros wasn't personified yet. Eros was primordial life force energy. And so ultimately, that's how I feel. Our erotic energy is our life force energy. It's our creativity. It's what compels us to make love to our lives and each other, however we choose to do that, be that cooking, gardening, music, having babies, and our sexuality. It's all one cloth, different expressions of erotic energy. And I find that so in terms of the rising of the descent, and the descent and rising for me is how our eros goes to ground and then rises up in a new form through our lives. So this idea of the cycles of eros, I'm incredibly interested in.
no, I think that's fascinating. Again, I'm not going to put any spoilers for the book, but we had a wonderful conversation around that for the book, which I love that. So I thank you for that. As you were speaking, I was beginning to think, obviously, of the myth of Psyche and Eros too, which I think
Yes.
is incredibly helpful for this conversation as well. If anybody's listening, they want a couple of myths to start with. I think, Inanna and Psyche and Eros you could definitely have worse places to start than those two. I think they're
For sure.
wonderful, foundational stories for this type of conversation. So how, for a woman who wants to come to you and start to do this work, I mean, could you share kind of, very basically what that might look like? Is it just begins with conversations, I guess, but I noticed that in some of your retreats, there's meditation and breath work and, things like that happening. And that's kind of the way in, is it? Through those types of modalities, getting
So
back in
for
touch with the body
me,
that way.
yeah. So for me, I have a lot of different ways of working with the body, but the body is one of my key, it's central to everything.
Mm,
So in one-to-one therapy, I am very much guided by each individual person. So with some people, I do a lot of somatic work, and with other people, it's mainly talking because I think each person has a different way in and a different pace. And the beauty with one-to-one therapy is that you really can go at their pace. The work that I do is very relational. I'm not solution focused, which won't surprise you. Anyone who knows the Inanna myth, it's really not a solution focused thing. So I'm very much about relationship and what emerges through the relationship. And for each person, that's going to be different. When I hold circles and courses like the Naked Power Circle, and I used to hold a long course called the Butterfly Work. Yeah, I was bringing in breath work and poetry. We always do a lot of free movement and a lot of free sounding, and it's so fascinating. The voice is a whole other world of embodiment that, people have such a stuckness around making just whatever random sound wants to fall out of your mouth. I was incredibly frozen around that before I met my teacher, Kim Rosen.
mm,
And so, yeah, we're moving with the body because the body remembers, the body holds all of our stories. And what I find is if we move the body and we allow it to move us, importantly, something will emerge that we didn't know about. No matter how many times we've moved, no matter how many times we've sounded, something always emerges that because there's so much held there.
mm,
Not only our stuff, but the stuff of our ancestors, the stuff of the collective. It's all held inside our bodies. So, yeah, we move together and a lot of what I do is around witnessing. There's a lot of time for witnessing. So not only do we move the body, but then we come together in circle, we'll journal, and then there's time to share what's there for you and be heard in that. And bringing those two things together, I think, is incredibly important. And I'm so grateful to my teacher, Kim Rosen, who I've spent many, many years in circles with, because she has really taught me the exquisite practice of bringing together these non-verbal, very somatic kind of freeing practices, and then bringing the words and the consciousness to them through what falls out of our mouth after we've just been into the body. Because we write and speak from a different place once we're inside our bodies.
mm,
When we're speaking from a very heady place, it's very different. So once we've moved the body, once we've got really into those other landscapes of our beingness, something else can emerge out of our mouths when we communicate that we wouldn't have said from a different state of being.
mm,
And so that's very much the containers I hold are very much designed to take people there.
mm. Yeah. Yeah. Nothing to add there. Other than I loved hearing you say that poetry is a part of everything that
Oh,
you do as
God.
well.
Yeah.
Because to me, it's I remember an old mentor of mine talking to a group of men and saying something like, you know, um, if you can't get sexually aroused when you read Neruda, then you've still got some work to do. Yeah. Which I think is just beautiful,
Yeah.
And it's kind of, Pablo Neruda was his thing, but it's, insert poet here, isn't it? Rilke or,
Oh.
whatever, whoever speaks to you, but the essence of that understanding,
Well, I
I
guess what
believe to
he's
be
also,
true. Mm,
yeah, and I guess what he's also saying in that is that if you are armored so much that this poetry can't touch that erotic aliveness in you,
mm,
then there's some armor to be bathed in milk. So, and then again, we can't work with our sexuality only in our heads.
Mm.
It's not possible. It
Mm.
has to happen from inside the body because the body is where our sexual energy lives. And so, how do we get into the body? And
Mm.
how do we, and then the armor begins to soften,
Mm.
or we meet that armor and we actually get to feel we're wearing it. And unless we can feel we're wearing it, it's very hard to work with it.
Mm.
So either or, whichever one comes first. Yeah. And that's very much what my new book is about, when those moments of when we bump into our own armor and go, oh my gosh,
Mm.
I didn't even know I was wearing that. Like, what's inside, what's underneath that? And
Oh,
underneath that is our erotic energy, usually something that's been held, trapped, that needs to reveal itself again.
yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Mm.
As soon as you said about this idea of being in our heads and not being able to get in touch with our erotic energy that way, my immediate image was the the use of pornography by young men,
Yes.
which is just such a heady activity. It just takes you away and out of the body and puts more armor on.
Yeah. And I
Um,
had at least three men that I interviewed that said that porn felt like a safe way to express their erotic energy because it was a flat page and it wasn't something that they could harm or do any damage with. That was a repetitive
mm,
comment that came up
mm,
in the men that I interviewed. And I didn't interview that many men to have that many men say that to me. So it's
mm.
really curious to me how all the different ways that pornography can help us dissociate from those primal energies that are taboo or that we've been wounded by others from the outside. Or yeah, there's so much there, isn't there? There's so many reasons why that ends up being the way.
Yeah, we could spend the next hour talking about that
Oh
and
yeah,
not even scratch the surface, but it's
it's
well worth naming. I guess the other thing that came up for me, Carly, was I don't know if you're aware of the story, the Knight in Rusty Armor, which
no.
which which kind of I guess maybe puts a little of what you were saying in kind of a story context. But yeah, but the basic preface of the story is, there's the greatest knight in the land. He's always in his armor. The full face mask is down, and he wears it to bed because he is a knight. He wins all the festivals, and all the princesses swoon. But he is a knight. So he wins the great tournaments and he gets given the hand in marriage of the most beautiful princess in the land. But when it comes to consummate the marriage, he realizes that the armor is rusted on, like it's been on so long that he doesn't know how to get it off. And I don't know if you've ever made love to a man in a steel suit, but it's probably not much fun, right? Especially when you can't even see his face, and his voice is muffled and everything like that. And so she basically kicks him out after a time. She tries, but she kicks him out, and he ends up on his descent. He walks through the forest, getting increasingly more miserable, and he comes to a lake, and he looks in the lake, and the reflection back at him is just steel. Like he can't even
Mm.
see his own face. And so, the story is that he does his work by the side of that lake and, slowly eases the masks off and, eventually de-armors himself and sees his own face in the lake and cries and cries and cries and doesn't know himself, but eventually, you know, comes to understand who he is and comes back out of the forest and knocks on the princess's door. And of course, she doesn't recognize him, but then he has to win her heart properly, not not
Sure.
not through jousting and not through being the warrior and the greatest dude. He has to actually win her heart properly. But there's a happy ending. Maybe
Wow.
guest Inanna shows up. Maybe his sister shows up.
Yeah.
Maybe
But
there's a bath of
also,
milk. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, I also get that, seeing himself in the lake, he's being witnessed, and the
That's it.
compassion that floods as he cries, then his tears start to flow. And so
Mm.
I've got goosebumps all over as you were telling me that. I thank you
Well,
so much for sharing that with me.
I often look at that story from the man's perspective, but as I was speaking it, I was thinking about it from the woman's perspective, and to have a chap that you fall in love with, and yet you know, how do you make love to steel? Like you don't know who that person is. So many men coming into marriages with armor on still, you know, and there's no spaces to reveal themselves. And often you do have to go off and do the work, right? You know,
Yeah.
and then come back for the sacred union when you know who you are,
Hmm.
when you know who
Hmm.
you are, and maybe we could add when you've found that erotic charge underneath it all. You
Yes.
know, we can actually arrive back in the bedroom as a sexual being, like a
Mm.
truly sexual being, not
Hmm.
a heady one, but you know, from your whole body.
Yes. Yes.
Mm. Well, if that's what you're doing in the world, Carly, then a very deep bow to you, you know, a
Well,
very deep bow.
likewise,
Mm.
it's really beautiful to have this conversation with you. It feels like our work has lots of very beautiful meeting points. So yeah, grateful for this conversation.
Yeah, I think so. And you know, as we draw to a conclusion, I'm just wondering, um, I mean, your work with this, you know, rediscovering your sexuality are you getting women from all walks of life and all ages, or is it does it tend to does it sort of particularly kind of bend towards a certain type of woman? Or I know it would be available to anyone, but I'm just wondering the types of women that are coming in the door. My immediate thought is that, you know, there'd be a lot of women perhaps with sexual trauma.
Yep, I have a lot of women come to me with sexual trauma, but actually, I find there's a lot of women with sexual trauma. I mean, the
Mm,
vast majority, I would say. So,
yeah.
it's not, yeah. Um, and what I am so heartened by is the range that my work seems to pull from. And perhaps that's something to do with the fact that I'm in midlife. So at the moment, I can bridge both worlds, like can speak to younger and older women. Maybe it's the depth of the Inanna myth that can speak to people of all ages. So in my latest book, my youngest interviewee was 23 and my oldest was 71. And I was so delighted that like a number of women and men in their 50s and 60s and 70s got in touch with me to speak to me about this. This is the truth of it. It's not a particular age where hopefully we work with our sexuality, our embodiment, the stories, the things we need to learn for a lifetime.
Mm.
So the fact that I draw such a wide age range is wonderful.
I guess that does lead me to ask maybe an obvious question, but do you do couples work as well?
It's something I would like to do in the future. I'm not doing it right now just because I have so much to do. I have trained to be a couples therapist, and it makes a lot of sense for that my work will go in that direction next. But I'm not quite there yet because
Mm.
lots of there's too many things going on right now to begin that. But yes, my husband and I, we have a spiritual teacher who is also a qualified therapist and an elder for us. She's 80 something. She may just be 80, I think. And we see her once a month. And that's not because we're in crisis. We went to her because we needed someone to hold and tend our relationship with us. And we felt we needed that kind of eldering. And it's been utterly life changing. And our relationship was in a great place when we started. And it's deepened and supported us so much. We've been going for nearly 2 years now. And I just feel like, yeah, at some point, I definitely want to offer what she has offered to us in my particular way to other couples because I feel like there's so much work to be done there and there's so much we can do in our relationships. So not
Mm.
at this point, but definitely it's coming.
Well, I love to hear that, and I also love to hear you say that, you know, going into some kind of work on your relationship sometimes it's not because the relationship is in trouble at all. I just think it's part of you know, the deepening and the experience, and having, as you say, having an elder there to kind of, you know, tend to the flames with you and just sit with you. I hope there are couples out there that hear that and that opens something inside them as something that they can potentially explore, because I think it's just an absolutely beautiful understanding of the way relationships are.
Yeah, me
Mm.
too. And it feels like such a beautiful cyclical end to our conversation because we started with talking about males and females and the polarities going on. And I do feel like in our personal relationships, that's where we really, the grassroots work of healing those things happens inside of human beings being in relationship.
Mm, mm. No, thank you. Well, I will give you one more opportunity before we kind of sign off, Carly. And I don't think we've really talked about what exactly this book that's coming out in a year from now covers. So I just want to give you the opportunity to kind of speak into that, this big project that you've been undertaking so that people can kind of get a little feeling for what's coming down the line, what's being birthed.
Sure. So the book is about, I guess as this, I'll pull on it, I'll speak on it as we have spoken, some of the things we've spoken about. It is about bumping into the ways that our erotic energy has been held and trapped, and noticing that's happened, and then getting curious about what's inside, what's been snared, and how we release it, how we allow it to start to flow into our lives again. And so it's about, yeah, coming into contact with our erotic energy, but also broadening our understanding of what sexuality is, what orgasmic energy is, what eros is. I mean, I noticed a lot of people I interviewed that eros is ambiguous to a lot of people. Eroticism is kind of a little bit misunderstood. So it's about facilitating people to kind of reframe sexuality and eroticism and get really creative with and freer with how it is moving in their bodies and the body of their lives.
Well, I can't wait to read it in its entirety, Carly. Look, thank you so much for your time in having this conversation with me. I really appreciate it. I know how busy you are, and for those that are members of the Fifth Direction, you can look forward to having Carly come in at some time in the future, sometime later this year, and to run a session around all the themes that we've been speaking about here. And for you, Carly, I'll put in the notes here, how to get in touch with you, your website and social media and stuff like that. But yeah, from the center of my chest, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I've really, really loved this conversation.